Jerry, we'll kick off. So, thank you very much for coming on to Build Insights, the podcast. It's great to have you here. We've spoken many times over the years through various points of conversation, but really just wanted to get you here today. I think if there's a go-to person for the Clerk of Works service, it's probably you. I was just looking at you on LinkedIn earlier. Your current title is the immediate past president of the Institution of Clerk of Works and Construction Inspectorate. A very honourable title indeed, and that follows your reign as president, which ended not too long ago. Maybe we can start there, and then we'll go to how it all started for you, and then we'll work through that. So tell us a little bit about being the president of the Institute of Clerk of Works and Construction Inspectorate.
Well, okay, yes, thanks, Ben. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all on this podcast. Anyway, effectively, I became president of the Institute of Clerk of Works back in May of 2023. In fact, 2023. You only have you become president of the Institute of Clerk of Works only for a year, and in that time you have to write several articles for Site Recorder, the official journal of the Institute of Clerk of Works, and also, of course, go around visiting various statutory bodies and organisations and institutes to attend their local events. I was invited to the JCT for their annual get together down in the House of Commons when they were launching the series of JCT contract documents. Or the revised edition, I should say, and I was also invited over to the Hinkley Point C nuclear power station works by the quality control inspectors down there, and I also visited. Among several other things, I also dropped in to see the military clerk of works down at Chatham. The Royal School of Engineering down there, of which the military clerk of works are quite an important group, and I also popped in to see the estate clerk of works down at Westminster Abbey. Very interesting chap, and had a good look round their works there and what they are doing.
Fantastic.
So that's among the, and of course, apart from visiting all the chapters up and down the country. And then last October, I also was lucky enough to go over to Hong Kong, because the Institute of Clerk of Works have a chapter in Hong Kong as well. So it was good to catch up with those guys.
I saw that, and it was interesting actually. When what you've done there inadvertently, or maybe very purposefully, is highlight how big of an organisation the Institute of the Clerk of Works and Construction Inspectorate is, and how much of an influence it already has, but could have on the industry if, dare I say, if the industry lets us in. Let's go back, if I may, to the beginning. You've been doing this for a few minutes now. You've been around the block, as they say. So, what made you come into the role of a Clerk of Works? What was the key factor that drew you in at the very beginning?
Well,
and when
I started off. I was a carpenter and joiner by trade. When I left school, I got an apprenticeship with a small works firm up in Cambridge, and I did a 5-year carpentry and joinery apprentice, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Small works was good. My dad was an architect, you see, so he said you need to join a small works firm because then you'll learn a lot more about the whole of the building trade around you, because there are lots of bits of elements that fit in to make a house, to make a school, all those sorts of things. So, and he was absolutely right in that respect. You learned a bit about bricklaying, a bit about plumbing, a bit about plastering, as well as doing the labouring. I can still remember taking 10,000 bricks off a lorry that arrived from Peterborough and unstacking those with only one other person, and all that dust was flying around. I still remember that. But getting into a Clerk of Works, I got to a stage where, because it was a small works firm, you didn't have a lot of help, and I was putting up roofs and things like that virtually on my own. And there was a particular occasion where I was working out on a farm. It was the 3rd of January. It had just started to snow, and my labourer who was with me at the time doing some drainage there, while I went off at lunchtime to get the rolls from the local bakery, when I came back, he'd taken my timber ladder and cut it up and used it on the fire, and I think that was probably the last straw for me. So
Yeah.
I went home and I complained to my dad, and he said, "Well, you should become a Clerk of Works. You know what they do." And that's absolutely true, because when I was small, during the summer holidays, to get me out from under my mother's feet, my father would take me round on some of his jobs. He was an architect for what was then the Regional Hospital Board for East Anglia, and he was involved in a number of projects, building maternity hospitals, health centres, right the way across East Anglia. And I got to meet all these particular guys, bearing in mind for those jobs they were always a team. There was, apart from the building Clerk of Works, there was services Clerk of Works, there was a drainage Clerk of Works as well on all these very large projects. And of course I got to know all these particular guys and sit in their offices and look at all their drawings, so I knew vaguely what they did. So when my father suggested I should change directions slightly, I thought this was quite a good idea. And luckily enough, as the way things turned out, only a few weeks later there was an advert in the paper for a training course for Clerks of Works. This particular one was up in Doncaster, so I applied on it. It was what they called a Manpower Services Commission course that was then run by the government. TOPS course was its shortened name, and I went on this course, and then I got a job as an assistant Clerk of Works for the London Borough of Enfield, and that was back in let's have a think, 1978.
Wow.
And I
Okay.
started my career from there, really.
Excellent. I mean, so obviously, you've been through various, what shall I say, various businesses within the role of Clerk of Works. What's been the most exciting part of your career, if you could pinpoint it? Is there anything in particular that you've done that you think was either innovational, was a change in the industry, was, or maybe it's actually not a positive thing. Maybe you've seen a situational change that has had a detrimental impact on the industry. I know that there's certain things that I've seen in my relatively short career compared to yours. So, are there some key points in your career that
I think
stand
there are.
out?
I think there are a number. I mean, certainly one of the most exciting times. I went into retail, and I worked for Sainsbury's, who were at the time involved. This is the late 80s, early 90s, and they were involved in quite a large program of putting up supermarkets and hypermarkets up and down the country. I was charged with a small area, and the innovations, because obviously the client wanted their supermarkets as soon as possible, because when they opened on the morning, the famous opening morning that all supermarkets had, the managing director, Lord Sainsbury himself, was always there, and they would reckon to take £1 million over the till.
Wow.
That very first day. And when you think about it, that's over 30 years ago, and it was important to them. And the time I was with Sainsbury's, the innovations that were starting to come in to improve the build, to make the whole project quicker, going from, while I was there, they would build an average size supermarket in about 56 weeks. By the time I left, they'd brought a similar size store down to about 46 weeks. And that obviously it involves the contractor, getting the contractor on board and all his services, and pods of various descriptions were starting to come in. Sainsbury's had quite a traditional JCT build in place. They used to use a contract called the Sainsbury's 89 version then. By the time I'd left, they'd moved on to design and build, and making the supermarkets a lawful lot cheaper to build and quicker to build, which of course is more profit for the company. Whether the maintenance was in place to make sure those particular buildings were running as smartly, that remains to be seen. Certainly some of the stores I've been back to not that long ago, in fact, could have done with a few licks of paint here and there, and the odd roof tiles
absolutely.
replacing. However,
it's interesting, Jerry. Sorry to cut you off just before we go too far on it. We touched on a couple of interesting subjects for me there. One is the difference in application, JCT, design and build, etc., which I'll come back to in a second. But then, do you think, just listening to what you say there, in terms of the Sainsbury's build, was that your first, or have you had previous experience with MMCs, modern methods of construction? Do you know, system builds, MMCs?
Not really before then. Most of my projects had been involved with local authority. When I'd started with Enfield, I then moved on to Hackney, doing far more housing, refurbishment on tower blocks and things like that. And then I moved into Sainsbury's, and that was then the largest scale. I don't know. Built a few schools with Enfield, but that was strictly traditional construction. With Sainsbury's, they were starting to introduce more smaller weight pods for the toilets and that sort of thing, staff toilets, and there was more mechanisation involved in, say, bringing in coffee shops and things like that. Half of the coffee shop was already constructed as it came in, and then was put together on the site.
Sure.
So that was the first time I'd seen that, certainly.
So in terms of how you do your job there, so obviously the application of the Clerk of Works service, if you will, the role within that that framework changes, doesn't it? You've now got different stakeholders, you've got different interfaces, you've got different timelines, etc., and it makes things inherently more complicated to record the quality assurance, to make sure that you deliver from your side. You know, I think that's something that we experience regularly now with different modern methods of construction coming into play.
Yeah.
So how was that journey for you? Obviously coming from a traditional build housing background into an MMC system build framework, you know, was that a baptism of fire for you? How did you? Was it exciting,
I think
daunting?
It was a baptism of fire. We were very aware that what our reporting standards needed to do. This wasn't just a tick box exercise. We had to make sure that we recorded all the particular units that came in, that they were sealed properly, they weren't damaged. It was because we were Sainsbury's Clerk of Works themselves. It was our job to verify that all these particular items were approved, they weren't damaged, they were okay, and they were fit to use. And then to supervise the quality of the put together, basically, to make sure they worked, and it was more or less right first time. We did have to have a few rejections. I remember there was overnight on one particular store in Haringey I was working at, two of the checkouts that came from a company called Sage. Two of the checkouts weren't working properly at all, so they had to be replaced. They were brought in from, in fact, another store overnight. There was still money in the till, I seem to remember. However, because of Sainsbury's being a large client, they had the clout to be able to do that. various
Yeah.
area directors would phone each other up and say, I need 2 of your checkouts. We've got guys coming in at 7 o'clock this evening. Can you make sure they're stripped out, unloaded? Because we need to be back and running again 7 o'clock the following morning. So there were a few overnighters involved in that respect, definitely. But it was very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it worked in large, which is obviously great. Just going back onto contracts then. So obviously the old firms, if you will. So when you were working for companies, I so I'm gonna relate to a housing market really. So on mass house building,
Okay.
one of the biggest problems I've had is the way that the procurement is done. So typically now you've got a client. That's where you positioned. That's where I've been positioned anyway historically. And then under that client, you've got a principal contractor that's going to carry out the works, and then within that framework, you've got multiple subcontractors. And I would love to know your opinion on this. So my opinion has always been that it's incredibly hard to pin down remediations with subcontractors that are always on the move. You might pick something up at the beginning of the week, you get to the end of the week, and they've gone. They're not there anymore. They've moved on because they're working for price work, day work, etc. And contractually, they're not as well tied in as what I would like.
Yeah.
And then you compare that. And the other thing, just as part of this discussion, is positioning. So I think as a clerk of works, my opinion is that it's incredibly important to be positioned in the right place within a contract, and to have some teeth, if you will, because there's been numerous occasions where I've been put in situations where I'm allowed to bark, but I'm not allowed to bite. If that's a fair way of putting it.
No, that's absolutely. My own particular opinion is clerk of works are brought in by clients far too late within the contract. I always think that construction inspectors, site inspectors, clerk of works, however you want to term them, should be brought into a contract right at the very early stages when it's being thought out and being designed. Most of the clerk of works, we've been around the block. We've got quite a lot of experience. We've seen numerous schemes, developments go up in our time, and the experience we can add to a younger team, certainly in terms of elements, even regarding things like programming and so forth. Clerk of Works have a huge amount of experience that isn't really used enough by the construction management teams that there are out there. And I think that's always been one disappointing fact. We've always been brought in far too late. And the other element on, certainly in terms of anticipation, you mentioned anticipation. I've always felt that the inspectors need to be abreast of exactly where they are on the programme. Not only what the contractor is reporting, but what is actually happening on site. As you gain your experience being an inspector, you know exactly which trade is going to follow what trade. And to be able to alert the project manager, the site manager of any issues that there are before the next trade starts, get them in writing, get them photographed, is very, very important, because as you rightly say, subcontractors will come in, they'll do their bit, and they'll move on fairly quickly. There needs to be sometimes from our contractors more of a mechanism, with the help of construction inspectors, to actually record this, to say, this is going to catch up with you sooner or later. If these drains aren't correct, it's going to cause knock-on problems further down the line, and you'll be spending thousands and thousands of pounds in remediation before you even get to the handover. And I think construction inspectors have a huge role in doing this, and it's certainly what I've been trying to do most of my working life anyway.
Well, I would agree with you, and I think there's still remains a huge amount of untapped potential. I think there's a certain level, unfortunately, the way the industry is set up, where the profit margins may be quite tight, there's a huge level of resistance to a clerk of works, as it still remains a non-statutory requirement. So obviously the money goes into building control, and quite rightly, there's a statute requirement for that. And warranties, obviously, I'm heavily involved in the warranty market, and but it's not the same thing. You know,
No,
the,
no.
the level of detail a Clerk of Works will go into, the level of interface and communication that becomes available between trades, between
Yeah.
management, between stakeholders. It's not yet tapped into, and I think that is largely down to the way that contracts are put together, the
Yeah.
way the financial aspect of the project features within the main framework.
Yeah,
So
certainly. When in my younger days, my various mentors that I had said to me, it's all about communication. What you do and how you do, um, is incredibly important. Oh, we can't access your video. Okay, I'll
oh,
I'll go
you're
back
back
on
now,
that. You can
Jerry.
always edit. You can
Yeah,
hear me
go
okay now.
back 10. Yeah, go back 10
Yeah.
seconds.
Okay. Okay. Certainly, I think so, when I first started, my mentors said to me that the most important thing is communication. You've got to be able to speak to people and speak to people in the right way. And it's not just the site managers. If you manage to work up a relationship with the trades foreman as well, you can tap them up for how are they getting on? Are they being put under pressure? Do they have any material issues? Are they waiting for things to arrive? And all of that information can build into a picture of what you want to report for that particular day in the site diary, or in fact in at the end of the week when you do a weekly report for your client. Um,
Yeah.
it gives a chance for the contractor to say, "Oh no, that's not the case." But if you've made a record of it and you can justify it against the program because XYZ trade are slipping behind time, it does make everybody more aware that you are in fact doing that proper role of being an inspector on site, to seeing how the progress is, because at the end of the day, that's what the client wants to know. He wants to know how his progress is so he can make his handover dates.
Absolutely, yeah. So you know your job and I know mine, but what I still get asked quite regularly by my wife more than anyone else, what is a clerk? What is a clerk of works? And I think I've been wanting to ask you this question because you know your presidency within the institute and obviously your experience. If you had to give a description, a representation to a clerk of works, what would you say?
I'd say, she's not actually here at the moment, but my wife always moans at me when I've done various bits of work around the house. I always think she'd make a very good clerk of works, because sometimes her bite is far worse than her but. She's a very good paper hanger, by the way. She's far better at me than that. No, a clerk of works themselves is, I've always seen, as a third party inspector, an independent person who can go round a site and use their experience to verify exactly what the quality is in terms of the actual project and where it is on the program, to give a very fair assessment of where the project is. Obviously, a clerk of works will have the clerk of works themselves tend to have not just their knowledge, they'll know where the project is within the program, but it's about the quality. You want to make sure that the quality is there as well. Are the teams doing a good job? Are they doing the work that's written on the architect's drawings and within the schedules and the specifications? Any testing that's being done, is it appropriate? Is it to the building standards? Is it something that eventually, when our colleagues from building control came along, and that's another thing, because when I was a clerk of works, I always used to make sure I knew who the building control officer was. If they were on the site, I would always make myself known and introduce myself to them, so they knew that was someone else there, not exactly backing them up, but making sure things were done right. That's an important thing, element.
Absolutely, yeah.
Communication again, you see.
I think communication and relationships, integrity, they're the sort of fundamentals that set the operating procedures, aren't they?
Yes.
I see a revival in the Clerk of Works. Historically, obviously, it's been going back a long time, and you know, you've been a part of that certainly for the bulk of your career, short of being a carpenter, which obviously makes you the elite because I am also a carpenter. But anyway,
Good man, well done.
But obviously now we're starting to see wording within the Department of Levelling Up frameworks, etc. For the requirement of a Clerk of Works, which is positive. So just tapping into your institute connections now, if somebody wanted to become a Clerk of Works, what would your advice be to them?
My advice would be, for a start, to number one, if they're interested in becoming a Clerk of Works, is number one, contact the Institute of Clerk of Works at their headquarters in Peterborough. There are a few training courses available through colleges. A lot of it is going to be down to experience, the Clerk of Works or the individual's experience in the first place. But there are openings, and because there are a lot more jobs advertised now for Clerk of Works, for quality managers, for independent inspectors than there were say 15 years ago. There are far more jobs advertised, and that's because I think clients are eventually coming round to see the need that there needs to be separate inspection, because clients still want their buildings done just so, and the fastest they can possibly get. The need for independent inspection in this famous triangle of time, cost and quality is just as important. You can never have time against cost without quality, because otherwise it'll all go pear-shaped.
Time, cost and quality. I like that. We're going to use that moving forwards.
Well, there was a famous project management. I think it was an equation showing this equilateral triangle, etc., and how all sides were important for the end of the scheme. And too often, when things like clients' pressures on because they wanted a particular building done, the time element would increase or decrease depending on it. But if the time element increased, of course, it put the costs up, and the quality then suffered as well. So getting that balance right is absolutely important, and that's where I believe Clerk of Works can help.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example of what we do, what we strive to do, what we continue to do.
Yeah.
So, what now for Jerry? Jerry's retired, but he's probably the busiest retired person I've ever met. I know you've been doing so much recently.
Yeah. Well, I still keep banging on about the need for a Clerk of Works on a building site, and although I'm actually retired now, I'm still heavily involved with the institute. I'm on their management board. I'm on various educational membership hubs as well. I'm not part of the charter group, but that's something that the institute is striving for now. I believe that particular banner will broadcast the message to a number of other groups across the world, because it's not just in the UK that there are Clerk of Works and quality control inspectors.
Sure.
Everybody will be aware, of course, that since Grenfell, the amount of cladding refurbishment programs there are. Well, I was recently speaking to a gentleman who's with a firm down in Victoria in Australia, and they are starting to do cladding remuneration. What many people won't realise is that from the outfall of the original RIBA report into building failures, remember the Oxley schools up in Scotland and the PFI jobs with the walls falling out, it turned out that there were a number of of over 6,000 buildings in Australia on the east coast alone that had problems with cladding that wasn't checked or inspected beforehand, and a lot of that is now starting to kick off in Australia. And I've also spoken to quality control inspectors in America and also in Canada as well, who they're called owner representatives over there, not so much Clerk of Works, but it's independent third-party inspection. That's what they're doing because they've seen a need for it over there as well. So it's that sort of thing. I'm still involved and banging the drum, basically.
Good, keep banging. So, for those of us that are still doing the day-to-day, still carrying out the role on the front line, if you will.
Yeah.
What would you like to see moving forwards? What is one thing that you would like to have seen in your time on the front line that you think that needs to be carried on now by the rest of us?
Well, the one thing, of course, that we didn't have many, many years ago was, of course, continual professional development. I think that is so important now. The industry is still changing at a rapid rate, and there are new methods, new products, new systems, new ways of doing things that are always coming in. And Clerk of Works and quality control inspectors need to be on top of that particular system. They need to be able to have at least a smattering of knowledge if this thing arrives on their site. Don't forget that more often than not, contractors will propose a particular thing halfway through a job. By the way, we're bringing in this. Were you aware of it? Well, actually, no, but I do know a little bit about it. And have you thought about this or have you thought about that? So I urge all inspectors to keep on top of their CPD. That's very important these days.
I agree entirely. Entirely. So much so that ACS, who sponsors this video, and ultimately who I work for, we close our business down regularly. We bring all of our staff in, and we have CPD, which is led by the demand from the sites, and it's important. But even just that sort of what's the word? The collaboration between staff, bringing everyone in from remote positions, getting in the same room. What we discovered early is everybody's good at something, nobody's good at everything, and that's what makes a team.
Yeah, so absolutely. Everybody needs to be able to have a voice, even if it's the smallest person in the room to the chap with or the lady with the loudest voice. It's important that everybody gets a voice out in these sort of particular meetings to tell us what problems they've got. It's one of the reasons I still attend the chapter meetings at our institute. Our particular chapter have got people from every single inspection life that there is, and if you don't know something, you can always ask one of these particular guys or gals. Everybody likes talking about what they do, let's be honest about it. I'm no exception, and there are other people out there. It's communication, talking to people. It's very important. Absolutely. Even now.
A lost skill, perhaps. But
a lost skill. The other thing I would like to, of course, to mention is the rise in the number of surface apps, the electronic tools to be able to do your job. In my day, of course, it was all a waterproof notebook and a pencil that you went round on site. Now, of course, nowadays there are electronic devices available for all sorts of snagging, and there's a huge number of them out there. And I think it's important to be able, every Clerk of Works, to be able to update their skills, to at least have a go with them, see how you get on. That is important because the industry has changed quickly. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. So fantastic having a conversation with you, Jerry.
Yeah, good to speak to you as well, Ben.
I feel like there's so much more to come, and hopefully I could coax you back in for perhaps another session in the future.
I'd love to. That would be fabulous. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say now without me prompting you? Is there anything you want to put out there that we can shove on this podcast for people to hear?
I think the most important thing is the message about what we do and how we provide value for money for clients out on a site. There is no doubt in my mind, and I've seen it so many times before on jobs that I've been involved in right from the start to jobs that I've had to take over from because they didn't bother to have a clerk of works in the first instance. Clerk of works, site inspectors, quality managers, we all provide value for money from our clients. Sometimes that's not recognised, but there is no doubt we can certainly help as being part of a team to point out problems right at the very start when they occur.
Couldn't agree more. I wish more people would embrace it. Hopefully after they watch this, they will.
Well, I hope so too. I hope so too.
Excellent.